I read 6 books in the month of May, and honestly this month was all over the place, so I'm very excited to get into it. I found a couple of books that I really enjoyed, one that really made me think, and then one that I DNF'd. So let's just talk about everything I read and see what I liked and didn't like. I'm going to go through all of the books in the order that I read them. So we're going to start off by Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. This is a collection of talks that C.S. Lewis has had, and it was adapted into a book. Essentially, he explains and defends core beliefs in the Christian faith using logic and everyday examples. I would really recommend, if you don't know anything about Christianity, a good book to get into just to learn what the faith is about is this one. If you are a new Christian or even a seasoned Christian or someone who doesn't know anything about Christianity in general, I would really recommend reading this if you're interested, because he does a really good job simplifying everything down so that it's understandable for everyone in their walk and their faith. I really had a really great time reading this. I did a mix of reading it on my Kindle as well as listening to it in audio, and honestly sometimes I preferred it in audio because I think because it's a collection of his talks, it was almost meant to be listened to. But I really enjoyed this book. I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. I think it was one of the most thought-provoking books that I have read all year, and it is a book that I really want to own physically, so eventually I'm going to buy the physical copy and annotate it and just reread it every now and then when I need to refresh myself on what it was talking about. I think C.S. Lewis has a really good way of explaining complex Christian ideas in a very logical and accessible way, so it was really insightful for me. Again, I really highly recommend this. Obviously this book is not for everyone, but this is the first book I read and I really loved it, and I thought it was very informative, very easy to understand. Some sections are harder to digest than others, but overall I really had a great time. It was a really great start to my month. Starting off with the 5 stars was really refreshing, and it really encouraged me to keep reading for the rest of the month. Going into my second book that I read, I also read another C.S. Lewis novel. The one that I read was Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. I actually vlogged my experience while reading this. I tried to challenge myself and read it in one sitting. It did not happen in exactly one sitting, but I did read it all the way through, and it took me I think 4 hours. It's very short, so it is very easy to get through. As for Screwtape Letters, I had a really interesting experience. I think because I was reading it for a challenge and trying to beat the audiobook time, which was 4 hours, I was really challenging myself to read quickly, but this is a book that you really need to slow down and read just to digest everything that he's saying. My first language is not English, so part of me had some difficulty understanding his writing style and his Old English voice. Trying to read it fast to beat a challenge while trying to digest everything that was happening, I think took me out of the story. So if I were to go back, I would totally reread this and slow down and just break it up into chunks. Something that I really loved about this book was the creative format. It's essentially fictional letters from a senior demon named Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood, teaching him how to tempt and distract a Christian. This was just very interesting. I mean, you never really read something from a demon's perspective trying to stray a human away from God and trying to take them away from the presence of God. So it was really interesting because obviously when you read a Christian novel, you typically read it from the perspective of the individual who is trying to make these decisions and wrestling with these temptations, but this is the perspective of the being that is tempting you. I think part of that did make it a little difficult for me to understand because obviously their enemy is God, so whenever he was saying take them away from the enemy, I had to rewire my brain to think of the enemy as God, so that was very interesting for me. But again, that could have just been a result of me trying to read it really quickly and just get the challenge done. So I really do plan on going back and rereading this eventually. As for my rating for this book, I rated it 4 out of 5 stars just because I think it was a little bit more difficult for me to understand at times. I definitely plan on rereading it, so my rating might change, but as of right now, I think that Mere Christianity was way easier and impactful for me to digest than Screwtape Letters was, but that just could be just the way that I read it, and I am interested in rereading it eventually. Moving on to my next read, I had a monthly TBR that I was trying to accomplish for the month of May, but I did not read many of them. I actually only read Screwtape Letters, I think. All the rest I started, but I never finished. One of the books that I selected for the month of May was Here Lies Daniel Tate by Cristin Terrill. This one just had so much promise for me, and I just could not get through it. First of all, I realized why I've had this on my shelf for so long and I couldn't get past it. It's one long chapter. It literally doesn't have any chapter heads at all, no breaks, and sometimes the break will start in the middle of the page, so I never knew when to stop reading, and I think that was really exhausting for me because I think chapters just offer a really nice mental break even if you're continuing to the next chapter right away. That really took me out of the story. I just realized that I never said what it was about. Here Lies Daniel Tate is essentially a psychological thriller about a guy who pretends to be a missing teenager and becomes entangled in family secrets. Just hearing that, it sounds like such a great book, and I'm sure a lot of people love this book. I have read a lot of thrillers, and just this one didn't grip me that much. It is very clear right away that he is a manipulator and that he is an unreliable narrator. You never know when he's lying and when he's telling the truth, and I think that was very hard for me to read because I just don't know what to trust, and it starts to feel almost like, why am I reading if you're lying? I'm sure that it has a lot to do with the story and how he is an unreliable narrator and how he starts to live his life and lie his way around everything. But for me, I think the chapters not being there and just the constant lying and not even knowing what reality is. Even when he was talking about his childhood, it felt like, is this true? Because it would change in a couple of pages later. And I feel like either that was me being pulled out of the story because I just wasn't in the mood, or it's just a difficult book to follow. If you have read this book and loved it, please let me know in the comments because I'm willing to give it another chance. But right now I'm DNFing it. I just can't. I've tried to pick it up so many times and I just couldn't get through it. I will be getting rid of a lot of my books soon, so if you could just leave me a comment in the next maybe a week or two. If someone makes a really good case for this book, I will keep it and I will reread it, but as of right now, this is gonna go. I really couldn't do it, but I did give it a chance and I just couldn't get through it. When I DNF books, I don't give a rating just because I didn't finish it, so there's no rating for this one. Moving on to the next two books, honestly. As many of you know, this is the month that Off Campus came out. My best friend Rebecca loves this series so much. She was just begging me to read it so that I could watch the series with her. And so I just, dropped everything and read the first book and the third book. I had already read the first two books maybe 2 to 3 years ago. I really enjoyed the first one. The second one wasn't as interesting to me, but I think I might have just not been in the mood, so I'm not really sure. I reread the first one, which I also have another video for that because I read it in a day and then watched the series right after just so it was fresh in my mind. And I have a lot of interesting thoughts. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about what this book is, just in case that you don't know, even though I feel like a lot of people are talking about it. For you who don't know, The Deal by Elle Kennedy is a hockey romance that follows Hannah and Garrett as they strike a deal that unexpectedly turns into something more. It's very fun. I think it's very lighthearted. There are definitely deeper themes in this and there are some trigger warnings, so please check that, but I feel like overall it is a very lighthearted book. The one thing that I didn't remember from reading this back when I was in college is how smutty it was and how much cursing there were. That is something that I have outgrown and it almost took me out of the story at times. There are things that happen in this book that need to happen, and I'm not against reading smut up until a point. I feel like the first scene was very impactful and necessary, but other than that, I personally thought it was too excessive, and I did start to skim, if not skip those sections. And in my opinion, if I'm able to skip those sections and still get the full story, then they're not necessary for me to read. I know some people really love smut and that's for you. For me personally, I don't really try to read as much of smut anymore. Overall though, this was a really fun book to read. I had a really great time reading it and then watching the show right after. I thought that they did a really good job with the show. They did change a good amount of details for the show, but I thought that they did a really good job. I was always in the mindset that the movie or show adaptation should always stick to the book as close as possible, but I feel like they changed it in a very fun and modern way. The changes that they did make were better for TV and for someone who is watching instead of reading, so I really did appreciate that, and I thought that the details that they added were really fun. The casting I thought was really great. I feel like almost everyone was exactly how I pictured from the book, so that was much appreciated. So moving on to the next read, which was the third book in that series. I actually skipped the second one just because their story was not in the show, and as I was watching the show, I realized that it was also focusing on the couple from the third book, so then I was just like, I haven't read it, so let me just read it so that I can get caught up while I'm watching the show. For the third book, I mainly listened to it in audiobook. Now, this novel is even more smutty than the first one, so if you had a hard time with the first one, I would recommend listening to it and skipping the parts that have smut because it is very smut heavy. This book follows Elle and Dean and their love story, and for you who don't know, Elle is Hannah's best friend in the first book. She has been someone who's always been in relationships, and then she goes through a breakup and she's just trying to do something that's more casual and fun. She gets entangled with Dean, and it's just exploring how something can turn from casual into a relationship into something more serious. These books, I feel like, are a really good palate cleanser between other more serious and more heavy books. Again, I listened to this, so I skipped through some of the smut scenes. If it wasn't for the smut scenes, I would have rated these books a lot higher, but as of right now, for the deal, I rated it 3.5, and then for the score, I rated it 2.75. These ratings are specifically because I just couldn't do the smut and I just had to skip a lot of it, and I feel like if the book is mainly smut and not as much plot, I just get taken away from it because I have to skip so much. If there wasn't as much cursing and smut scenes for me, I would have definitely rated these higher. I really appreciated the stories and the themes that they explored, but those are just my ratings for right now. On to my fifth book. I actually wanted to change it up because I started out with so many different genres, Christian fiction, then romance, which I haven't read in a long time. I just wanted another palate cleanser from the romance, and I actually picked up a memoir by Shari Franke, The House of My Mother. This was a memoir by Shari Franke, who talked about growing up in the public eye as a part of the family behind the channel 8 Passengers and her experiences with that environment. It definitely focused a lot on her relationship with her mother and her father and her siblings and just living her life in the public eye. So it was very interesting to just look at Mormon culture and just growing up on YouTube at such a young age. I'm not Mormon, so it was very intriguing for me to read from that perspective just because there's only so many things that I know. Obviously, we have shows like Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, which I know it's not an accurate representation. It is a memoir, so for me personally, I usually rate memoirs 5 out of 5 stars just because if someone is really willing to put out their voice and their story out there and be vulnerable with everyone, I am going to respect that, and I really enjoyed reading from her perspective. I thought it was very easy to follow, and she really opened my eyes to this type of culture. It was very heartbreaking at times just seeing things that she went through as a child, and she went through things that no child should go through. It really explores the dangers of social media, especially when you're introduced to it when you're very young and you don't know what you're doing, and how controlling people can affect your life. It's very sad. It mentions and goes through a lot of difficult topics to talk about. I'm sure that most of you have heard of this story, so I don't want to go too in depth. I totally recommend reading this book. I thought it was really well written, and I thought that the points that she brought up were very important. Moving on to the sixth and final book that I read this month. That was The Thorn Queen by Sasha P. Smith. I have a deep love and appreciation for fantasy novels, and it was just so amazing for me to get back into this world. I had read the first book earlier this year, and I thought it was a standalone because I just went on my computer and I was like, oh, give me some good fantasy standalones. And I read it, and then I realized that it was not a standalone, but thankfully it was a duology, and the book came out a couple months after. I wanted to wait a little bit just to read it so that I can get back into the mood of fantasy. I think I've been trying out so many different genres this month, so I wanted to make sure that I was really ready to go back into a fantasy novel. And I was back. I was really excited. I had a lot of fun. The first novel is called The Rose Bargain, and because I read the second book in the series, I don't want to say too much just because I don't want to spoil anything, but essentially The Rose Bargain is Bridgerton mixed with The Selection, I would say. I feel like mixed with Selection, but also fairies, and I had a really great time. Like the first novel, just like Bridgerton, it takes place in England, and at a certain age every woman has to present herself to the queen as a way for her to present herself to society. Because this is a fantasy world, the queen is high fae and she has lived for so many years. She's the only fae in the human world, that's why she's queen, and she has power. So every time that someone presents themselves to her as a way to enter society, she makes a bargain with them. And when the fae make a bargain, they aren't always fair. So it depends. One girl may make a bargain to be more beautiful, and she might say, you can't have any fingernails. Like something silly like that, but obviously some can be more difficult than others, and the more that you ask, the more she takes away from you. The first novel follows the perspective of this girl, and she enters society, and she has a lot of dreams and a lot of aspirations, and she's very witty, and I really appreciated her character. There was times where obviously the main character annoys me a little bit, just because I feel like I always have tension with main characters just in general. If they don't make any bad decisions, then there's not much of a plot, so there is that. This book follows family dynamics and decisions and how impactful your words are and how you shouldn't just make a deal without thinking. I think it is a little bit different from what I've been reading. I think, if I remember correctly, I rated the first one 5 stars just because it was so different for me at the time, and I really appreciated the direction that the author took with the story. But when I got to the second book, I rated it 3.5 stars, and that's because the characters weren't as well developed as in the first book. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil anything. I thought the second novel was way more plot heavy than character heavy, and for a book that has so many characters, you would want them to be developed further. I don't know how much I can say without giving anything away, but in the first novel, I really appreciated every character, and I thought that they added something to the story. But then as we transitioned into the second novel, a lot of the characters that we grew to love in the first novel really faded away into the background, and we just didn't hear much from them, and their character wasn't as important to the overall story. I just thought that they had so much more potential. I understand why she wanted to focus on the plot just because there was a lot going on, but as a reader who really appreciated what she did with the characters in the first novel, I almost felt like I was missing out part of the story. Other than that, I really did enjoy it. If you are a beginner romantasy reader, I would recommend this book. I think not a lot of people talk about it, and I really think it's something that people should talk about. I've done a lot of talking, and this brings us to the end of this video. I had a really great reading month. Even though 6 books might not be a lot to you, to me, that is a huge change. A couple years ago, I would only read maybe 1 or 2 books a month, and now I can say that I've read 6, and I think that's awesome. I definitely challenged myself this month, and I tried to read from different types of genres. I'm looking forward to having another great month. So if you have any recommendations for things that I should read, please leave a comment below. And if you have read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts, either if you agree with me or disagree with me. I can't wait to hear about it. Until next time, bye.